Just a word or two today on a contemporary problem that we're facing. And I've said it before that I have not spoken on the vaccines in a homily because it's such a complex matter. And all of the issues that we face with COVID-19, in my opinion, if one was to really lay it out well, all the different facets, it would take 4 or 5 hours of series of talks to really delve into it and to get it very clear. But one issue that's on the horizon now, which I want to give some light on, is that of mandates or coercion or bullying or manipulation or pressure that's put on people when it comes to this vaccine. And one thing is very clear in the teaching of the Church. The Vatican has recently reaffirmed this in its document, very simple document put out on certain aspects of the COVID-19 vaccines, is that it must always be voluntary. And that's true in the Church and in the state and in situations of employment. Now, in society, in the social contract that we're in the broader context and our relationship to the government, those that have a legitimate authority in the community, and our relationship to our employers, and their relationships to us, there are clearly things that can be mandated in society. That goes on all the time. And just to give a couple of examples, for me to be able to drive on the road, they mandate that I must have a driver's license and the car has to have a warrant of fitness. And in order to get the driver's license, I have to have my eyes tested. And that everyone generally accepts that this is a legitimate law that requires something and obliges something of citizens for the sake of the common good, protection of others. And that can even happen in certain jobs. Certain jobs will mandate something. Well, in fact, in any employment contract, there are mandations. So a person is required by their contract to turn up for a certain number of hours, to work each week, etc., sometimes to dress a certain way. And sometimes even in certain jobs, there are certain things required in terms of the measuring of things that we would consider more private. For example, a pilot will have to have a physical test to make sure that he's healthy once every, 6 months. And as he gets older, that frequency might increase, and they'll test his aptitude, test his eyes. The same for maybe a bus driver. And when people sign up to such employment contracts, they accept that these are things that are required and they freely consent to them because they're given the choice. It's voluntary that if you want this job, these are the conditions and this is what will be required of you, etc. Same for maybe a high level, like a dangerous job, working on a construction site. Maybe an employer might say that every month you have to give a urine sample to check that you're not doing drugs and that you're not a danger to others on the work site. And some people would accept that for the sake of a common good in the workplace. Now, all of those things are things that are required on something outside of us. But the reason I'm saying that there are making these analogies and parallels is that we accept in so many areas of civil and modern society things that are mandated of us. And normally we can see the reason that they're given for the sake of the common good. But there is a critical difference, of course, when it comes to a medicine, especially one like a vaccine. Those things that I've just mentioned are all things that are from the outside and they're measuring something of the body without intruding into the body. With a vaccine or a medicine, it is going into the body, and that makes it extremely different to anything else that is mandated. And so clearly, and this was worked out after the Second World War also, given what the Nazis were doing to the gypsies and the handicapped and Catholic priests and the Jews and others, they were forcing medicines on people, doing medical experiments, coercing them, not giving them proper informed consent, and abusing them. And after the Second World War, we know the history. The Nuremberg Codes were established, and they are in fact the foundation apparently today of what they call good clinical practice in the medical fields, that there always must be informed consent. No one can be forced to take a medicine against their will. They should not be pressured. They should not be bullied. They should have all the information put on the table in front of them so that they can make their own decision. So that is a fundamental principle that the Church upholds, and it's from the natural law, and it's confirmed by the authority of the teaching of the Church. that can never be violated. It's inviolable. So if a state or an employer begins to put pressure on and to mandate certain things, it is clear as day immoral. They cannot do that without breaking the natural moral law and thereby acting against the good of their citizens and abusing them. So it's an injustice. So that is the first thing to be very, very clear on. But the question is, we know the state is not very Christian nor very moral today, and many people within society are not that moral, so that will apply to employers. The question is, what do we do? If someone was applying for a job and an employer said, look, it is part of our employment contracts that everyone has to be vaccinated, then okay, some employers will do that in a free market society. They might ask of that kind of requirement. It's not very just, but we are in a free society, a democracy, where certain employers could ask such things. They could even ask that if someone comes into their shop, they would prefer them to have a proof of vaccination. Sure, those kinds of things could be there, not very moral, but we know that that's probably going to play out in that way. Employers in that regard might have the freedom, but at least the one employed or the customer coming in is given the choice to go away, and it's not being forced upon them, and they're not put in a situation where they feel they have to. But I think if it comes, and we're not quite there in New Zealand, although in saying that, I'm aware that those in the military have been told they will lose their jobs unless they're vaccinated. Many nurses have been told the same. Others on the front line, MIQ staff, have been told the same. And that is after they have signed their contracts, and that is deeply immoral to force that kind of mandate on people who are already in employment, depending on that employment for their livelihood, to tell them basically you don't have a job unless you stick this in your arm. That is utterly unjust to people. Just as a principle, people are immediately thinking, I'm sure, of what do we do? Yeah, but how do we deal with this? Sure, there can be, then you look for the means of how we deal with the situation in another way. But one thing that can never be done is the forcing of vaccines on people. And we saw how that goes wrong. And as soon as you allow this to be established in society as a norm, woe unto us, because it will lead to other abuses in time, no doubt. And we've seen that in history. Can there be private requirements, like, for example, in a daycare centre, there might be a policy in one daycare centre that says that they want the children to be vaccinated really before they let them in? Yeah, there can be policies on those things because the vaccines have generally been proven to be safe. They're on trust. Everyone accepts that those previous vaccines were generally pretty good. And that brings me to the next point that I want to make before we come back round. As Catholics, we believe in faith and reason, and we definitely believe in the cooperation of our intelligence and our faith, and the intelligence searching out how to use the creation well. So it's not properly Catholic to take a line of principle against things like vaccines, to say God's given me an immune system and thereby I'll trust in that immune system and I don't think I will ever need any help, and I refuse the help of medicine because I have an immune system from God. That's not a proper Catholic way of thinking. We've always seen, because we live in a broken, sinful world after original sin, there is disease, sickness and suffering, that we should use our intelligence to the best of our ability to help and alleviate suffering, and that includes medicine. And we do this in every walk of life, from building houses to building cars. We use technology to assist our human life everywhere. We don't say God's given us nature and that's all that we need. We'll live in caves and we won't do anything in our technology to assist our human life. And that includes medicine. It is clearly totally right and just that we use our intelligence not only at the service of our faith, at the service of the revelation, that we use our intelligence at the service of the creation to help us live a good human life. So if a vaccine is proved safe, it's effective, it's got all of those criteria behind them, and over time we build up a trust in the medical profession that what they're giving to us as vaccines is trustworthy, safe, effective, then, and this has happened with the MMR vaccines across the board, everyone seems to have said, okay, we take them for the good of society based on a possibility because we want to prevent the disease before it occurs to get loose in the community. And that has been generally accepted across the board. Now, the issue of abortion taintedness, I'm not going to deal with. The church has dealt with that, and I've spoken about that before. But just vaccines in principle are a good thing. We've beaten so many diseases because of them, and it is not properly Christian to reject such technologies as long as the risk-benefit ratio is properly worked out. That sure, with any medicine there is a risk, and a lot of medicines we take on trust. The whole of our society is built on fiducial trust. When we drive across a bridge, we trust that it's been properly designed, etc. But that trust can be broken down. The trust, especially in a Western society where there are many checks and balances and regulations and standards and laws, we build up a very great confidence in the community that so many things that are given to us are trustworthy. And that includes the foods we buy in the supermarkets most of the time, etc. But that trust can be broken down. And the medical world now is in an interesting, complex situation where it has certainly undermined that trust by giving us certain medicines which are not always what they have seen and what they have said to be. And the pill is a good example, where the medical world will not tell women the truth about the pill, what it does to their bodies, and the possibility of getting breast cancer. There is a almost universal lie told. Abortion is another example where the medical world will not give the truth on such procedures to women in difficulty and try to hide that information. And that's a good example of where there is a lack of informed consent, and that is one of the works of the pro-life community in the church, is to try to give women the proper information so they can make a proper decision and help them to make a decision for life. And the fact that the medical world seems to want to hide that across the board in so many ways, and they're aided and abetted by politicians and institutions, is gravely concerning, and it undermines the trust in their profession as to really are they on about the true good of the people. And I say all of that because we lead up to the COVID-19 vaccines. Are they trustworthy? Are they safe? Are they effective? Are they necessary? Are they their only means? And are they voluntary? They are all questions, and it's put out in the Vatican document in the final paragraph 5 and 6 that should be asked legitimately by people. And it is not to be an anti-vaxxer to ask such questions. It is not to be someone peddling a conspiracy theory. What's concerning to me is not only the mandates, the coercion, the forcing, which is immoral and illegitimate, is that when normal people raise normal questions, is it safe, is it effective, is it necessary, is it the only means, and is it voluntary, they're immediately shouted down and censored and told that they should shut up and trust. Now, this is not acceptable today, and we know about in other areas there is censorship going on, for example, on abortion, on the homosexual agenda, on the transgender agenda. So many of these things where legitimate people are trying to speak in the scientific field as well as the philosophical and theological field, and they are so often censored. And it's very concerning now that very, very highly qualified doctors are raising questions, legitimate questions that should be asked by any free agent in a society, and they are being censored and shut down and told that they cannot have a voice, and there's a singular narrative being peddled by the media. Every citizen is free to do their own research on these things and try to come to an informed decision as to whether they want to take the vaccines or not. And I'm not going to try to delve into the medical situation because I'm not a doctor. I have no authority or qualification to speak on the medical safety of the vaccine. And it's up to each of us, I think, to do our best to research as far as we can as to whether they are safe, whether they're truly necessary, given the pandemic, for not only one's personal good, but for the common good, whether there are other means to be researched, whether it should be, clearly we want it to be voluntary. All of those questions are legitimate and should be weighed up. And we are not being somehow immoral by raising those questions and wanting them answered. And it is perfectly legitimate moral decision if someone looks into all of that and forms their conscience and decides that they don't want the vaccine. That is completely legitimate. If someone does all of the weighing up and looks at all of it, the risk-benefit ratios involved, and decides that they will take the vaccine, and that is also perfectly legitimate if they are based on good information. This is a situation where there can be legitimate diversity of opinion on such things, as long as we're basing it on true information, of course, and that's hard today, to find the information that's always trustworthy. And sure, there will be different degrees of proportionality as to the personal good and the common good, and how one works out what is the responsibility to each of those goods. Fine, that is a matter of debate and discussion in a society, given that this vaccine is new and experimental. It's still in the first phase of trials, etc. And there are a lot of unknowns with it. Is it safe? I can't answer that. But what I would say is that we don't really know, and I think many other doctors are saying that. The long-term effects, we don't really know, and thereby people can try to ascertain such things. It's very, very important to know. And that prudential discernment will depend on what sometimes one's personal situation is and what the situation is in the country. So, for example, if someone is between 18 and 45, they might look at the stats and the numbers and say that they see that there's only a very, very slight chance of them dying and being hospitalized. They may not want to take the vaccine. The argument that says it's a matter of fraternal charity, it's a matter of brotherly love to take the vaccine is a true principle, normally, to say yes, and I would normally say that is true of the MMR vaccines, etc., for the sake of others and for one's own personal good and the risk-benefit ratio. It would normally lead one to say that yes, I'll take the vaccine in order to avoid an outbreak for my own good and for the good of others. But it's seeming, and I'm happy to be corrected on this point, and this data might change. This is an ever-developing situation with more information that comes. It seems that even being vaccinated with the vaccines that are available, especially the mRNA ones, people still carry the virus. They're still carriers, and the viral load is the same, it seems, from the data I've looked at from the Johns Hopkins Institute and others, and it's been proven by the experience in Israel and Iceland, a bit in England, and now in Gibraltar, that everyone vaccinated has turned out to be a carrier, and thereby the argument that says that the vaccine must be taken for the sake of others and fraternal charity to stop them from being infected is not as strong as it used to be. Even if the vaccine maybe reduces your symptoms, therefore you're a little bit less contagious, sure. Or we could say also that by taking the vaccine we reduce our symptoms and we reduce the likelihood of being hospitalized and going into ICU, so therefore we reduce the load on the hospitals. That could be an argument of fraternal charity, but that's at a second or third level in fact, because it's something that may not actually happen. Sure, they are arguments, but one can raise questions legitimately if one has good information to say, well, if I'm still a spreader having taken the vaccine, is there still the same responsibility to the common good? And that can be weighed up and debated. It is not, I don't think, illegitimate to do that weighing up and that debate in one's mind and one's personal discernment and one's personal prudence. Just this morning I was reading that in Gibraltar, they have a 99% vaccination rate, and now there's a massive outbreak, and people, now they're having to go back to lockdowns. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, so let us wait and see. But these are all the factors that need to feed into one's personal decision-making, and it is not illegitimate to do so. We have a sovereign, dignified right to do so before God. These are rights given to us before God that are not given to us by the state, and we have every single right in our life to look at it with our own intelligence and to try to, as to the best of our ability, to make the best decision that we can, and to then be in peace with that, and that should be respected by the society and by others. And if necessary, there might need to be legal challenges mounted in order that mandates do not get the traction that they seemingly might have in the future. When it comes to worship in the church, and I'm sorry for the length, but it's something I think that I felt a certain responsibility to say something on. We cannot have a situation, I'm not saying this is going to happen in New Zealand, but I've noticed overseas there have been temptations of this. It's happened in certain dioceses where bishops have said that all people working for the church have to get the vaccine, or then even some have said if you're going to come to church, you've got to be vaccinated. That is utterly unacceptable, to have a situation where some who are vaccinated, the clean, are allowed into church to worship and the unclean are going to be separated and segregated out. We do not do segregation in the Catholic Church when it comes to worship. And that is utterly immoral. I've seen one bishop do that and now retract it. But he hasn't retracted it on the moral illegitimacy of it. He's retracted it because the state changed its policy. And that's another point that we must make very clear. On these issues, we have to be independent and be informed by proper principles of the moral law, including the principles of the gospel, and not just take all of our cues from the state. It is often immoral. So let us pray that that does not happen in any way in the church to any greater degree, that these things are properly respected. Once again, I just want to repeat, I'm not telling anyone what to do on this matter. I'm just saying we all have a responsibility to inform our conscience properly and act in accord with our conscience. And it is hard to do this weighing up, but one must unfortunately take the time to do it and try to find the best information available. If people want to speak to me personally, I'm quite happy to talk to people on the phone about more particular situations. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.